Hi, Dave Anderson from the Heart of Heritage Hunt. This is episode 9, part 2 of a three-part story about the 1st Minnesota Volunteer Infantry during the American Civil War. In part 2, you'll hear about their infamous charge on the second day of the Gettysburg Battle and hear a song I wrote about it called Blue Rain. Hope you enjoy it. The 1st Minnesota Volunteers continued to fight in 1861 and on into 1862. They were part of the bloody battles fought during the Peninsula Campaign, the Battle of Antietam, and at the end of the year, bivouacked in Fredericksburg for the winter. 1863 started with a fight in Chancellorsville, and after the battle, they trailed the Union Army north. They finally caught up to the Army as it was engaged in a battle in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, arriving early in the morning on July 2nd, the second day of the fight. They were placed just behind the Union line that stretched from north to south on Cemetery Ridge, at the exact spot that Confederate General George Pickett's men would charge the next day. Throughout the day, they stayed out of the July 2nd fighting as a unit, but many of their men were pulled away and assigned to other fighting groups and moved elsewhere. The remainder stayed behind the ridge until they were pushed up to the front of the line in the early afternoon. Around 4 p.m. that afternoon, General Winfield Scott Hancock, a Northern commander, was riding along the line of the ridge when he came upon the 1st Minnesota Volunteers. He was horrified to see that only 262 Minnesotans comprised the Union line at that point, and gathering directly below them were over 1,500 Southern troops making ready to charge the hill. Hancock knew that if the rebels assaulted the hill, they would run right over the Minnesota troops, outnumbering them 5-1, and get behind Cemetery Ridge and attack other Northern forces from the rear. Because that would have probably resulted in the Southern Army winning the Battle of Gettysburg and potentially ending the entire Civil War, in haste he turned to an aide and directed that Northern troops be brought back on a run to fortify the line. He knew, however, that best case it would take at least 5 minutes for them to get back. Turning to the Minnesota men, he told them that he needed time to get reinforcements and asked them to attack the 1,500 Southern soldiers that were assembling below them. "Charge those lines," he said. Without hesitation, knowing that they had just been given a suicide mission, the Minnesota Volunteers fixed their bayonets, turned as one, and charged down the hill. Southern soldiers who fought them later indicated that they could not believe all the Minnesota men would put up such a desperate fight with the odds so much against them. The battle only lasted 5 minutes. At the end of that time, sufficient Northern troops had moved into the Minnesota Volunteers' place on the ridge as to discourage the rebels from making an attack up the hill. As the Confederates retreated, the Minnesota men began to climb back to their place on the ridge. Of the 262 men who had charged, however, only 47 remained. The 1st Minnesota Volunteers lost 82% of the men who attacked that day, the highest casualty rate of any regiment in U.S. history, and I believe that unfortunate honor still stands. Word of the self-sacrificing bravery and valor they showed that day soon spread across the Army. When Abraham Lincoln came to Gettysburg months later to give the Gettysburg Address, when he spoke, "for which they gave the last full measure of devotion," he was speaking about the Minnesota Volunteers, as well as others. Years later, President Calvin Coolidge, making a dedication to the men of the 1st Minnesota Volunteers, proclaimed, "In all the history of warfare, This charge has few, if any, equals and no superiors. Those 8 companies of the 1st Minnesota are entitled to rank among the saviors of their country. I'm going to play a song for you now that I wrote about their part in the Battle of Gettysburg. There are a couple thoughts that I'd like to share with you about the song. The refrain starts, "Blue rain came pouring down." The actual day of the battle was hot and dry, but the day after the campfire talk where I learned about the Minnesota Volunteers' bravery, my wife and I were walking the battlefield while around us in the distance we saw cloudbursts of rain taking place. You know the kind. The rain comes down hard in a small area, doesn't last very long, and dissipates quickly. It just struck me that that must have been similar to what the Southern troops saw of the Minnesota charge. Also, I referenced the Minnesota colors falling and rising. Colors, for those that don't know the term, are the flags carried on poles and are unique that the unit carry around with them at all times. In battle, they are used as a marker on the battlefield so that members of the unit know where they're supposed to be during the chaos of fighting, and also where surviving members can gather after the battle. To carry the colors is an honor, but a very dangerous job. The enemy can follow the pole right down to the ground and know where to shoot to kill an adversary without even having to see them. I found it particularly valorous that during the 5-minute battle, the men carrying the colors were killed 5 times, and each time someone felt strong enough that they threw down their weapon to pick up and raise the unit's color and wave it proudly. 5 times a soldier honored the regiment and sacrificed their life. In my mind, that's the very meaning of bravery and valor. So here's my song, Blue Rain.
On Cemetery Ridge, above the fields of Gettysburg, stood Minnesota's 1st volunteers with combat nerve. As fighting raged below, advance pulled Union troops away, until that regiment was all that stood before the gray. Bull Run was their first test, and Antietam many more. Echoes of the past were heard as cannons all around them roared. So many comrades lost, friends and brothers far too young, but none of that distracted them from fighting yet to come. Blue rain came pouring down, drenching all the fields in blood and courage, valor that was real. 5 times their colors fell, each time to rise again. The Minnesota 1st was made of fighting men. Day 2 of battle stormed under a hot July sun. The general realized they were outnumbered 5 to 1. Sending for more troops, he turned and grimly faced the line. Boys, you must attack just to buy a little time. They didn't hesitate, their time to fight had now arrived. Even though to a man they did not think they would survive. Charging down the slope, they held that larger Southern force at bay. The Union line reformed and lived to fight another day. Blue rain came the fields with blood and courage, valor that was real. 5 times their colors fell, each time to rise again. The Minnesota First was made of fighting men. Afterwards, commanders spoke of heroes strong and brave, saviors of their country is what a president would say. 262 attacked with bayonet and gun, but only 47 heard the sweeping praise they'd won. Blue rain came pouring down, drenching all the fields with blood and courage, valor that was real. 5 times their colors fell, each time to rise again. The Minnesota First was made of fighting men. The Minnesota First was made of fighting